Hurricane Irma has killed at least 7 and left widespread destruction in the Caribbean. The small island of Barbuda is said to be barely habitable after Irma wiped out 90% of buildings, and there are warnings of similar devastation in all the territories that Irma is passing over. After Harvey and Katrina, all the hurricanes that have dominated communities, destroyed communities and dominated global media, you can be forgiven for asking what makes Irma different. Well, it's big, but that's not it. It's where it began, much further out at sea than hurricanes usually come from and over deeper ocean. To quote NASA, tropical cyclones are like giant engines that use warm, moist air as fuel. That's why they only form over warm ocean waters near the equators. But as the temperature rises, hurricane territory may be expanding. It's too early to say for sure, but Eric Fisher, chief meteorologist for CBS based in Boston, says Irma certainly is unusual.
Well, John, what makes this storm very unique is how strong it became so far out into the ocean. When you think about the Atlantic basin, to get your strongest storms, you need extremely warm water. That's the fuel for a hurricane, right? And the Caribbean and also into the Gulf of Mexico, those tend to be your warm water spots. That's where we have our records for strongest hurricanes. Well, Irma got up to 185 miles per hour east of the Leeward Islands, and that has never been recorded before. So it reached an intensity we hadn't seen in a location very far off toward the east, and it's maintained it, and it's expected to maintain that over the next several days.
And so 185 miles, we do Ks in New Zealand, so it's well over 300. So that is just ferocious, isn't it?
I know here in the United States, we're a little backwards with our imperial system. Everyone else does not follow, but yes, it is a ferocious storm, and we're getting some of those first images from the islands it hit directly in the British Virgin Islands, U.S. Virgin Islands, also Barbuda, and the northern leewards, and it looks extremely just horrible and sad to see, just wiped clean in some of those areas.
It's absolutely heartbreaking, the damage it's doing. And this is not a geopolitical interview. You're a meteorologist, but a lot of these communities don't have much money for rebuilding, do they? Puerto Rico, for example, has a debt crisis, and so the infrastructural damage will be hard for them to recover from.
That's absolutely true. Certain islands more well-off than others, and some of them do build better than others. You know, if you look at some of the construction, that's a big factor in the impact of some of these storms. Some islands you'll see all concrete, built to withstand stronger storms, whereas in the United States you might not see that.
Eric, it's too early to say I know about where exactly Irma will go in terms of Florida, but when you look at the Keys, this archipelago, which is low-lying, linked by a road that is essentially, actually, it's explicitly at sea level. It's actually at sea level. What sort of damage will happen there if Irma goes directly through the Keys and that area?
Well, I would think that this is the greatest threat to South Florida since Hurricane Andrew, and that was back in '92, and that was a much smaller, more compact hurricane. This will be a larger hurricane, and we've also seen a tremendous amount of development. That's a big story that as meteorologists we have been talking about for a while now. They haven't had a major hurricane in South Florida since Andrew, at least in the Miami area, and so you've added many, many people, many more buildings. It's just more harm. More in harm's way, I should say. So if you bring in a storm surge that's over 15, say 20 feet, places like the Keys, sea level areas, around Biscayne Bay that surrounds Miami, you are talking about a very catastrophic situation, especially with those strong winds on top of it.
And in the quarter of a century since Andrew, you talk about development, a lot of building, a lot of homes going in. Have meteorologists and people who understand these things been warning of the risk?
So absolutely. I think this has been one of the biggest stories over the last several years because we've had a bit of a hurricane drought, if you will, in the United States. We haven't had a major hurricane make landfall until Harvey, that we just had a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
But before then, it was 2005. So a lot of people in that time got a little complacent, and we were looking at places like Houston and like Miami, and lo and behold, back-to-back storms striking two of the most vulnerable areas in the United States. We think this will come very close to Miami, and it's a place that with some sea level rise already floods just when there's a full or a new moon phase, even without a storm. So you bring in a hurricane, and you could talk about some serious inundation.
That's Eric Fisher.